Let's get back. I want to pick up again back at verse 39 and 40, right?
Mhm.
Let's pick that up. Right? Um, let's go right back to 39 and 40, Acts chapter 27, when daylight is finally broken through, and we pick up the crew here. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto if they could. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisting the foresail to the wind, so they were heading for the beach. Now, this is the last step. They're out literally at the mercy of the wind. And here is where we can see the reason why. The reason why it was essential for the crew to remain on board. Okay? Because Paul knew nobody who else knew how to turn this ship around, knew how to do everything had to be done so that the ship is pointed toward the, the shoreline. It was essential for them because otherwise everybody else was going to die. Hmm? And let's be honest, only the experienced sailors would know how to do any of these things. The crew, the passengers didn't know how to do this. And you know, remember that earlier the rudder had been tied down. Okay, they had to tie it down. Otherwise, this thing would be going with the storm in every single different direction. Right?
Yeah.
So you know, you tell somebody, untie the rudder, and they look at you. What's a rudder? I mean, the simple things, a lot of times people don't know that. That's why our staff and our leadership, okay, has to know everything that takes place. One of the things that we did in the church, okay, is that we trained the entire staff. Everybody had to know what everybody else's job was in an emergency. In fact, we would have something called fire drills,
Mhm.
okay? And we practiced those once, twice, three, four times a year. And it was right in the middle of a service. You never knew what was going to happen. Okay? So I can be preaching, or one of the other pastors will be preaching, and all of a sudden the alarms will go off. Okay, and everybody, ushers, everybody was trained, and everybody, people are creatures of habit, right? You know, do you have those people that in your church when they come, they sit in the same section all the time? Hmm? You know, and it's like this is my pew, this is my seat, and don't and if they walk in, somebody's sitting in it, and they just give them that look. It's like this is my seat, okay? And and people, do you know people are they're just creatures of habit, okay? So what we had to do, we took the sanctuary and we split the sanctuary up in sections. We said, whoever's sitting in this section, you go up. That's your door. This section, that's your door. This section, this is your door. Okay. And we had to literally do this, prepare the church, because if a fire breaks out, what happens in a fire? People panic. They just panic. And it's everybody runs to the same door. And how many people get killed trying to do that? Okay? And so once the alarm went off, all of our ushers, plus the ushers who did not serve that day, but were sitting, they knew what everybody had to do is head for the doors. And we had ushers in the hallways, we had ushers everywhere, and then we had other ushers, okay? Their duty was to go through every single room in the church and make sure that every room was evacuated. And we had ushers who had to go into all the men's bathrooms and the women's bathroom, make sure they got cleared out. And we had to practice this. We literally had to practice, and they had 45 seconds to evacuate the building. That was it. And you have to have a fire plan, a fire escape plan, okay? And we had to train everybody because, and if I'm preaching and all of a sudden I said, ladies and gentlemen, okay, it's evacuation. Bam. And everybody knew exactly what they had to do. We had to get our sound people from up there down. Everybody knew and we had to practice this, and we had to practice in the middle of a service. You never knew. And we had to have people into the nursery, that's the headache. How do you get all these babies out of the nursery, right? And the mamas were in the church service, right? And what do parents want to do? They want to run to their babies, right? And we had to train the mothers, okay, you cannot do that. But it's my baby. You cannot do that. So you give them simple instruction. If that mother runs at it, you knock her out. Bam! You knock this fool and you carry her over the shoulder and you take her out the building. Because what? She's going to create a traffic jam. Let's say everybody's coming this way down the hallway. She's going to turn and come this way. 10 seconds can take people's lives. Now, how do you train a mother? Will take care of your baby. She goes, no, I want my, because emotionally in a state of panic, she wants a baby, right? So we had to train people to get them to understand that we already have staff and personnel there, and we had a group just designed for the nation. That's your job. And everybody knew that when they saw these people with the what do you call those chalecos? The green vest, the orange vest, the yellow vest, and they had them, okay? And they knew that team has got to go, okay? And we get them out, okay? Well, because they were the ones who were trained to do this. Now, on the ship, who was trained on loosen the rudder, raise the sail? I mean, have you ever raised the sail on a ship that size? It may say that, let me tell you something, it hit you, it kill you. The weight of the sail alone, if it fell down and it'd kill you. Who had the training? Paul understood that if everybody's going to live, and these fools need food because they have to do the hard work, he could see, you see, a leader sees past the obstacle and can see the objective. You know, that question the other day that, I don't know, it was Sevi or it was Cyprian, one of you two asked the question about what's the urgent? How do you define those things? You know, when one of you two guys asked that question, these were the kinds of things that we were looking at. How do you move people? Because people in a state of panic, they're your enemy all of a sudden. I mean, you're trying to help them and they're just so scared and they're in a state of emotion, they make no sense. And sometimes you just have to knock somebody out and put them on your shoulder and carry them because they're going to kill everybody else is what they're going to go do. Okay, so it's like in the water, right? You know, I remember this. In boot camp, in training, one of the things was that if somebody panics in the water, they're going to grab you, right? And they're going to grab your shoulder and they're going to grab your head and they're going to push you down. They're not going to stay up, right? And if you happen to be the buoy in their mind, right, they think you're the lifesaver, you're the buoy, right? And they're going to just try to take you down anyway. And so what we were told, you grab them, bam, and you knock them out. And you grab them, okay? You put your arm under their shoulder, under their neck, okay? And you swim and you bring them in because this idiot's going to kill you in a state of panic. Well, Paul can see. Remember, Paul had been in the water 3 times, right? Remember, we read 2 Corinthians, remember that? Chapter 11, verse 25. He'd been in the water 3 times. You talk about experience at going into the sea. The man, he was the only expert out there, okay, about this. So you have to look at your obstacle, look at your potential. What is everything happening? What happens if a tornado, a hurricane hits your building in Sunday morning in the middle of a service? Don't tell me that possibility doesn't exist. I've been in Romania. Okay? A, what plan do you have? Have you practiced it? Somebody has to see past the obstacle, potential obstacle, and how do I get my people out of here? You know, Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd, right? You're the shepherd. You have to protect your sheep. Even when the sheep are too stupid to realize they need protection. How do you protect them? You know, that question that I don't remember if it was Cipriano or Sevi, you asked that question, and we have to really think through these issues, how do you get this? Because, how do I move all these people? How do I get them out of here? If something happens, and the problem is that You never know when it's going to happen. That's the problem. You know, if you're on the East Coast of the United States where Gary is, okay, and I was on the West Coast, um, he had hurricanes. I mean, every year. We average 18 to 25 hurricanes in the United States every year. And these are not small little things. And you can see the trillions and trillions of dollars of damage and the flooding. And you go, don't people learn? Don't they ever learn? And somehow they don't seem to be prepared. And I don't understand that. Now, on the West Coast, our problem was that we would have these fires. And it would take 1,000,000 acres like that. And then we would get what's called the Santa Ana winds that would come from the desert, okay, over the mountain. Remember, we were describing the equilibrium, okay, as the wind comes over the mountains of Lebanon and it picks up speed. It can go anywhere from 5 knots to literally 50 knots. In other words, this thing can move from let's just take it, if it went 10 miles an hour, it can move up to 170 miles per hour. The wind's coming off of the mountains and then down. The problem is that on the West Coast, it would bring the fire over. What do you do? And in LA, it's dry. Los Angeles. It only rains like 6, 7 days out of the entire year. Now, it rains in the mountains, but not in the city. That means everything is dry. You know, in Los Angeles, they don't build with cement. You know, your apartments in Romania, you know, everything is cement. Everything is built in cement. Like here down in Peru, everything is built with cement, okay? In LA, everything is built with wood. So life is down to seconds, and the roofs are dry because it's just sun all year long. How do you move people once the fire hits our roof? How do we get people out of here? So you have to really think through, and that's why that question that when the brother asked it the other day, I mean, that was a great question. And Paul and you as a leader, you have to see what's the possibility. It's never going to happen. Really? But what if it only takes one time? Okay. Well, we've never experienced it. Okay. But what's the percentage of it happening one time? We don't know. I mean, I've been on the roads in Romania and I'm watching these winds and these clouds and I'm going, and I'm watching it jump over the fields. And I've been with a video and I said, man, that thing is getting closer and closer and closer. But what happens on Sunday? Can you imagine if all of us are sitting at the House of Joy, right? Which we've done before, right? And that's a big building, right? Now just think about it, it's such a huge facility. And we're all down on the first floor and a tornado hits it. How many of us would get out of there? See, so look at your buildings, look at your church buildings, look at your house churches, just think this thing through. And Paul could see, how do we get these people out of here? So that means I have to work backwards. I have to look at all the possibility, all the contingencies. Yeah? These are the issues that you have to look at. It's not just the physicals. How do I deal with false teachers that come into the church? How do I deal with somebody in the church who's listening to some false teacher and decides to contaminate the congregation with that false teaching? So these are real issues, especially you and I live in a day and age when I started out, and Gary, we didn't have the kind of competition that we have today. When we started out, you were the only voice in the congregation. Somebody would go, Pastor Cyprian was the one. You kind of go, well, he's the pastor. That's who we listen to. That's who we hear the word from. That's who's preaching and teaching. And that you were the main focus. Okay. Today, our people are listening on the internet and radio, 15 preachers throughout the week. Who are they listening to? You know, ministries come, the human side of ministry today is radically different. You're no longer the sole authority. Now people are listening, it's Pastor Cyprian, but it's also this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. You don't know who they're listening to. They don't tell you. And so it used to be they sat down and they go like this to you. Mm-hmm. They're reading the word. Mm-hmm. Now they sit in front of you going, I don't know. So-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. So you have to kind of, you have to look at the big picture. And this is why Paul can take this leadership principle and he can take and look at it and go, look, I have to look beyond the obstacles, right? And I have to focus on the objective. You and I have a battle today that all the other preachers didn't have before. I don't know if you realize it or not, but your job is more difficult today than it ever was when I first started out.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Do you think it would be wise as a pastor to every now and then have like a sermon or a study about the mainline teachers that are out there so that you can warn them? Or
Yeah, Pastor Gary has done this a number of times in his congregation, and I've done it because I was mentioning Cyprian, right, as an example, okay, because he can't go around everybody's house and tell them, you can't do this, you can't do that, he can't do that, right? And he can't control their radio, he can't control their internet, he can't take their phones away and tell them, you can't listen, I'm going to reprogram. He can't do that. He has to kind of trust, right? But in that trust, he may have a few people that are not all that discerning. It's those non-discerning people that come to infect the congregation from within, and he has no idea what's going on. So what we had to do is to look at all the false teachers. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest about this problem. You're listening to ba 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 ba. But here's what the Word of God says. And we had to address that issue because the speed of communication today, it moves so fast. By the time that Pastor Cyprian gets to the pulpit on Sunday, these people have been listening to 15 other people at a speed Monday to Saturday. You don't know. So we would have to, from time to time, stop. Okay, I'm in the middle of a series. Let's look at this because this is real life infecting us right now. And what I was always amazed about was the number of, then we would do a question and answer. We do a question and answer. And I was amazed how many people sitting right there have been listening to all these false people. So, we have challenges today that, that the previous generation of pastors didn't have to really be concerned about. You have to be at high alert now. You have to be now because your people have access, but the false teachers have access to them as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
It's a problem that we're facing now. That previous generations of pastors, when Gary started and I started, Billy Graham was still preaching evangelism. But now it's every conceivable nutball, crazy guys out there, and he's very slick. He's very impressive. He's very motivational, and they're very articulate. And they're very dramatic. It's just a whole show now, and people are just drawn into it. And here's pastor, he's teaching the word. Okay. Well, how do you compete with that? Well, you don't. You don't have to. Nobody told you to do that. But you got to show all that, everything that's, it's what do you call that? Glittery, it has all the shine on it and all that. It's not good. So you're facing issues that previous generations really didn't face at the level that it is today. So that's a good question. Yes, we had to do that on a regular basis. And in fact, just 2-3 weeks ago, I was listening to Gary. I listen to Gary on Mondays because I get invited to 3-4 different countries on a Sunday. And so I'm preaching. I start usually out Saturday night, midnight to preach, because Philippines and India, it's hours. So by the time I get to 8, 9, 10 o'clock Sunday morning, I'm preaching more closer and closer to this side of the hemisphere. But so I don't get a chance to hear him live, but I always make sure he's on my calendar on Monday. And I listen to him, and he's worked through these issues on numerous occasions because he's insecure about his people. No. Gary is not insecure. He is not insecure about his people, but he knows that the false teacher can reach their ears quite easily. Quite easy. And if not them directly, they have family members, and they have friends, and they have acquaintances. Not because you're insecure of your people, but your people are exposed to a lot of other people. And the enemy is, you remember the book of Luke that it says that Satan, right, the devil, el diablo, he finally stopped tempting Jesus. But remember at the end of verse 13 over there in Luke in chapter 4, it says that, but he waited for an opportune time. At the end, he's waiting for an opportune time. And this is what he does. Okay? So your question is a great question. Okay? And I want you to understand that. So we're talking about this principle about you have to look at the objective and get past the obstacle. Now, we don't ignore the obstacle. We recognize it, but we have to solve the problem. And you have to provide for different ways of solving this issue. And this is exactly what Paul was doing here in Acts chapter 27, verse 39 and 40, right? And so, who had the experience on that ship to get those big, heavy ropes? Okay? And they had to be free, and only the pilot could actually maneuver the ship, right toward the beach. Nobody else knew how to do that. Okay, so by the hand of God's sovereign providence, their course had brought them to this, how would I say, to this propitious, right timing spot to turn this ship around at this right moment. And only a few places in the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, okay, where they could try to get this massive ship beached to the shore. This was the one place. Now, you and I, we look at this ship 14 days getting thrown around, but that's what we see, right? But up on top, you see God moving this ship in the circumstances. Now, they don't know that. Remember, this is what, 270 pagans, right? On that. I mean, they don't know that. They don't know that. If we really believe in the sovereignty of God, if we really believe it, God's in control. Now, you and I don't have all the details. We don't have all that information, okay? And so, it wasn't some rocky cliff, okay? Or some little craggy shoreline, all right? But it was a bay with the beach. I mean, think about it. What was the odds? What is the odds that God would that this ship would find itself facing a beach? What is the odds of that? And if you study the coastline very carefully of all the way from when they left Israel and Lebanon, and they went all the way up, and the reason I had to study that geographically, okay, is because I was teaching through the second book of Corinthians, okay, and I was teaching through the mission trips of Paul, okay, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, what is the likelihood this ship would land in a bay where there was a beach? It's an infinitesimal percentage of what we would call the high improbability. But that's what's great about our God. We go, that's an impossible thing to do human. Well, we serve the God of impossibilities. Okay, okay. So we have to see now, who knew how to cast off anchors? I mean, you understand the weight of these things? Rip your arm off. The sailors knew how to do that, right? And so what did they do? They didn't have time to do this. So they cut these ropes. Well, how many of you know how to cut a rope that's 6 inches in diameter? I mean, you're sitting there. You're sitting there. Well, in case you don't know it, these ships, okay, they have blades that were designed just for that. Okay? And you didn't cut straight down. You cut in a 45 degree, in case you didn't know that, because we had to do that in the military, okay? And so there's the guy there. He's doing this as the ship is going down. No. I mean, there's no time for this, okay? So I want you to know, I mean, there's no point in wrestling with the anchors, right? I mean, if I'm a passenger, okay, we got to get this thing off, and we got to untie. Cut this thing, let it go. Let it go. You don't have a lot of time for this. So these details become very important for us to understand the big picture of what's happening here. Go down with me to verse 41. Verse 41. Look at verse 41, okay? They had no idea of what was to come. God did. Not even Paul. Paul had a picture, but he didn't have all the details. But he was a man of faith. They had no idea. I mean, they were headed, as far as they were headed for a virtual wall. Now look at verse 41. But striking a reef where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. Right? But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. Can you imagine? And the prow is in the water, right? And just for enough time, it got stuck. Bam! Enough time to get everybody off. Only God could have arranged that situation. If you ever been in that area where I have been, when I went through Asia Minor to preach, the thing, there's a place called St. Thomas, okay, and it's on the eastern side of today. It's on the eastern side of Malta, okay, and it fits the perfect description of what we see here in Acts chapter 27. Exactly where they landed. It fits the perfect description, okay, where the two seas meet, okay, and there is this reef, okay, I forget the name of it, Moon Ox reef, okay, and it's just, and you're looking and you go, wow, I'm reading Acts 27, going, man, it looks like the perfect. It's the only place that can conceivably describes what we see here, okay. And what happens is that, the breakers, when the water breaks and the waves, okay, and they both meet perfectly there. And you just sit and go, wow, God had this details planned out in advance. Right? And they would form this perfect crisscross long enough that there was people there swimming. And you watch, because it breaks and then it comes down to both of them. But over here, it's violent. I go, wow, that must be the place. That's got to be the place. Because everywhere you go, There's no other place I described. So we decided to go to the maritime history books, and we decided to go to the Maritime Museum and study out this whole coastline to find out, okay, where, and no other place previously existed like that as described, only this place. And we're looking at it and go, oh, now this makes a lot of sense. I mean, didn't mean I didn't believe it, but it's like when I went to Israel, right? And we were in Israel, and all of a sudden the Bible came alive to me. Wow, that's that description. That's the description. I mean, I could see it now. I mean, if I never went and saw it, I still believe it. But all of a sudden, there's great clarity. It's like when you go to Jericho and you go, the Bible, the Old Testament describes, the grapes this size and the grapefruits this size, and I mean, and when I get to Jericho and I go, well, no wonder it required 2 men to carry a branch of grapes, and it has 2 harvests every year. I mean, grapes this size. Now you try to pick up one of those branches by yourself. And I'm like, oh, all of a sudden, it comes alive to you. You go, wow, I got to picture this thing now. I mean, I saw watermelons the size of 1 meter. You know what 3 feet of watermelon is? These things are huge. I said, well, no wonder everybody wants to kill the Jews and wants the land. They think that God's going to bless the land, when the pagans come in. God will dry this thing up, okay? It's just, so when I see these reefs and I see the coastline, and I go, this is absolutely incredible. And there's a place in the reef there that is shallow enough for the boat to run aground. What's the likelihood? Only God can do something like this. Only God. Okay? And from the position of the ship coming into the bay, okay, it appeared that they had a clear path, okay? So what did they? They steered for it. Because remember now, we've moved to, dawn has come, right? The midnight is passed over. Okay, now they could see at least this part of it. Okay, and the ship ran aground in this little shallow part of the reef. That's what he said, by the way, when he said in verse 41, right? But striking a reef where the 2 seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. Right? I'm going, these little details, and I'm going, whoa, I see that now, and I see that now, and I see that now. Now, I believe it if I'd never seen it, okay? The ship was now stranded, okay? But it's still some distance from the shore, which is why they had to swim, okay? And you can imagine all this water is just battering around them, okay? And what happened? All hands were safe at last. Look at verse 42, 43, and 44. At that point, the soldiers, I'm not talking about the sailors, they realized that it was going to be every man for himself. This doesn't get better. I mean, remember I told you that it goes from worse to worse to worse to worse to worse, okay? And now the sailors, they were fools, right? We could see that. Now the soldiers are about to be fools, right? I guess it was equal opportunity, right? Right? If the sailors can be fools, we can be fools, right? Look at this. And these soldiers, they were not about to go into those raging waters chained to prisoners. I mean, George, you got to jump off this ship and you got a prisoner chained to you. Go, I'm just going to kill you because you're going to drown me. I mean, can you imagine you jumping off this ship with a prisoner chained to you? You don't know if he swims, right? You have no idea if the underwater swell will take him, what's going to take you. I mean, you have no clue. Look at this. This is a situation of pure chaos. It is pure chaos, okay? And so look at this. And remember that under Roman law, if a Roman soldier lost a prisoner, he paid with his life. All of a sudden, George's like Paul, right? Let's see, I die here in the water, or I make it back to Rome and die there because I lost him. It's your choice. Make a decision, buddy. But you don't have the luxury of not making a decision, because not making a decision is a decision. And so now the soldiers are going, well, we're dead anyway. So what do they want to do? They want to kill everybody, right? Look at it. Verse 42. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, right? So that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, because he sees Paul's credibility, the centurion actually submits his authority to Paul and says, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them, the other soldiers, from their intention and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. If you're a soldier, you're going, Captain, you want me to do what? Yeah, let go of your prisoners. Let them jump in the water first. What? And you follow. Look at this. And the rest should follow. This is verse 44. And the rest should follow, some on planks and others on various things from the ship, because things are floating, right? And so it happened that they were all brought safely to land. Now, and it was because of Paul's wise leadership, okay? Had not only endeared him to Julius, the centurion, right? Because he could see that Paul was right, 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 Paul was right. I mean, if you're right 9 out of 10 times, and you're wrong 5 out of 10 times, okay, who do you think I'm going to listen to? If Cyprian is right 9 out of 10 times, right, and Jordan is wrong 7 out of 10 times, you think this is that difficult? Well, let me see. Either way, I'm taking a chance, right? But I think I'm going to listen to this guy right now because he's been right 9 out of 10 times. Julius, the centurion, right? Because that was his name, right? Paul was right here. In fact, Paul was 100%. Now, what's the likelihood of that happening, right? I believe you. Unchain these guys. Let the prisoners go. When you develop that kind of credibility, now don't forget that it's not just your credibility, but because Paul had depended upon God and heard the voice of God. And so, and if you're that kind of man who's seeking the face of God and the word of God, and you hear the voice of God, okay, on a consistent basis, right, I think I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to be listening to you. Right? And so look at this. He says, and the rest followed. This is verse 44. Some on planks and some others on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they were all brought safely to land. Right? And but it made Paul indispensable to Julius. Okay? And so the centurion stopped the soldiers, okay, who had planned to kill the prisoners, right? Now, under another set of circumstances, completely different, he might have authorized the soldier to kill him. But this situation was being driven by principles and not by circumstances, and Julius could see this. Now, he may not have understood everything, but they could see the results. Again, if Cyprian is right 9 out of 10 times, and I'm going, and I don't understand how he did what he did, but I'm seeing the results in his life. I'm going, I don't have to understand every single detail. I just have to see that there's some principles working in his life, and he's working some principles over. I'm gonna take my chances here. And that's what we see here in the text. Okay? I mean, yeah, don't forget that from the perspective of worldly wisdom, not biblical wisdom, okay? Okay. If I'm Julius, that's the prudent, that's the smart move to make. This guy's been right. Now, I don't have to understand all the biblical issues, but I know this guy's been right. I'm going to follow him. How much more credibility do you as a pastor have who hears the voice of God? That's why I said earlier, you know, if Cyprian's been right 9 or 10 times and he's hearing the voice of God, you know what? I don't have to understand how he arrived at all his decisions. I just have to understand that he's hearing the voice of God. I'm going to go in that direction. But another interesting thing here is that centurion, Julius, wanted to save Paul. What happened? It's not that I have to save Paul because he happens to be right, but something changed. Something happened in the centurion. He wanted to save Paul. Look at this. It's just, this is absolutely incredible. It's amazing to me because when I see it here in this verse, look, go back to verse 43. Look at verse 43. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely. It's not that he had to bring Paul safely because if he didn't bring him, he might get killed for losing him. But now it went from, I have to guard you to, now I want to protect you. That little subtle shift was because there was a tremendous level of credibility, and they could see it in the life of Paul that he could get past the obstacle and remain steadfast on the objective as a leader. He could see this was a man of honor and a man of integrity. Right? And that's really crucial for us to understand. So when people look at you in leadership, I want to follow pastor. I want to protect pastor. I want to be useful to pastor. I want to help pastor. You know, when you first come in, you go, well, he's the pastor and I'm the sheep and I got to listen to him. And he's got the position, he's got the title, and I just got to put up with him. And then after a while, what happens is that, you know, I'm listening to Pastor Daniel, I'm listening, and I'm hearing God talk through him. And now what's happening is that little by little, my feelings, my emotions that have been aligned up with the Word of God begin to change, and my affections, okay, you know, begin to change toward this man. But because I could see godly principles operating in his life. You know, they start out as adversaries on the ship, right? Well, before that, when he got arrested, right? But what happened? And that is what begins to happen when you have a godly leadership. Don't forget, you will receive attacks. You're going to face attacks, right? And so, does that make sense to you? Can you see that in the scriptures?
Yeah, it's also funny. You can see that he already saw something in Paul from the get-go, because in verse 3 it said that he treated him very kindly, which was not normal for a centurion to do with a prisoner.
And he trusted Paul to get off the ship and go with his friends. He didn't go with his friends to his friend's house for them to take care of him, and he trusted him to come back. Wait, what kind of reputation did he have? What did he see in him? What do people see in your leadership? What do they see in your life? See, that's right. Leadership is not about formulas, point 1, point 2, point 3. It's about character, and more character. Okay? And as you develop that godly character, with it comes the wisdom of God, little by little by little. Now, Sammy told us, so we'll take our 10-minute break. Let's take our 10-minute break.
Praise Jesus.
Now, try to make a transition here. It's kind of an awkward transition, right? And we'll get back into Acts in the 27th chapter, but I want to just see if we can attempt to tie a couple of things in here, right? Because one of the things that I want to look at is from the perspective of 2 Corinthians, okay, tied back to the book of Acts. And I want to look at a leader's devotion to his people, your devotion to your people, right? Notwithstanding all the personal idiosyncrasies and the little quirky things, and some of our people are just difficult to deal with, and so forth and so forth. Some of our people are not sheep; they're goats. Okay? Some of them are, they're just difficult to deal with. But in general, I want to speak to the principle of leader's devotion to his people. Okay? And what I want to do is I want to look at Paul's leadership in Corinth, and his leadership is under fire. This is why I told you earlier that when I was teaching through the second book of Corinthians, which was a very difficult task, because it's Paul's defense, it's his defense, okay, of his leadership. And it's one of the books that I am more than convinced that every single pastor, you should know every single word in 2 Corinthians chapter, okay? And you should know that chapter, that book extremely well, because it's not if your leadership will be challenged, not if you will be attacked, it's when it's going to happen, okay? And there are leadership principles here that Paul lays out for us in light of his experience, okay, in Acts in Acts chapter 27. So we want to try to bridge this together. That's what I want to try to do, right? And so we move from Luke's narrative that we have in the book of Acts, okay, about how the Apostle Paul, and to one of the most poignant, difficult, and yet inspiring epistles. And it almost sounds like a contradiction, right? Okay, from the pen now of the Apostle Paul himself. Now, we're studying Paul through the pen of Luke. Okay, now let's make a shift here and look at Paul. Okay, and we're going to see in the next few chapters, and we only have 2 more sessions left here, so we won't see it here. Right? But if by the grace of God, Gary allows me to come back in November, we will be able to do this. Okay, Gary is and I want you to know, he is my dearest, closest friend. Okay, you heard him. I'll find a way to get to you. Okay? I'm gonna tell you something. I will defend that man. Okay, he is as difficult as I am. Okay, but he's got a heart. He's my best friend in ministry. Okay,
we'll pay you the coffee. We'll pay you the coffee in November.
Okay, there you go. Okay. So I want you to see in these next sessions as we move along now into November, okay, that we're going to be looking at some very key passages in 2 Corinthians, right? And so my homework assignment to you is to really study 2 Corinthians. And you will get the background because it's crucial to, I mean, in 38 years, 120 countries, okay, just thousands and thousands of churches I've been to, untold thousands of pastors. I'm always amazed when they come under attack, how many of them don't really understand 2 Corinthians. And we're not prepared for it. It's like we were not prepared for the coronavirus, right? I don't know anybody. I don't think there was nobody in the world that was prepared for it, okay? Now, they were supposed to be prepared, but they're not prepared, okay? In ministry, gentlemen, you will face conflict. Not once, not twice, not thrice. You're going to face conflict. And there's some principles that you have to know, okay? Not only as you personally defend yourself, because that's our human tendency, okay? But also in that defense, how do you edify? How do you build up the church that finds himself in some kind of a conflict? And we're going to face conflicts. There's no way of avoiding that. Okay? And I know that that's true in Romania, like any other place in the world. Right? I know that to be true. I've dealt with a few of them in Romania, in Lugos, particularly at Grace Church. I've had to deal with those issues, and I get dragged into it. Okay, so these are issues that are real everywhere, all over the world. Okay, so this is where, again, we go back to the meat and potatoes of this, where we get into the grunt work, we get into the detail work, we get into having to stick the shovel in the ground and just dig it back out. And this is the stuff that we don't want to do, but we pay the price for not doing it, right? So now, in 2 Corinthians, it's the most personal. It's the most personal, biographical, passionate of all of Paul's canonical letters. Okay, and yet it has the richest insight, right? As we go into this, and I want you to see this in terms of talking about the quality of leadership, not the quantity, but the quality of leadership. Right? Now, in the chronology of Paul's life, we have to do with the canonical, and we have to do with the chronology. Okay. Not everything that Paul talked about and wrote about was canonized in the Bible, right? But you could see the gaps in the chronology of Paul, okay? And this becomes crucial. Right? And so, and I want to talk about his relationship with Corinth, okay? And this preceded Maltese. This preceded everything that we've been looking at for these last 5 days. Okay? Which is what leads to his steadfast leadership under this most incredible crisis that he's having to face. Okay, and so don't remember that there's a time difference somewhere between 8, 9, 10 years, somewhere in there between these two experiences. So by the time we get to the Maltese situation, where the ship finally lands, he's got 10 years of experience. But these are crucial 10 years, right? And so I want you to understand that, okay? Now, when Paul took his first missionary journey, somewhere about AD 50, somewhere in that area, okay? And when you get to the shipwreck episode, okay, which we've been looking at and examining here, this is after his third and final missionary journey. And so you go from about year 50 to about year 60, 61, somewhere in there. Okay? So that's the reason why we had to go through Acts first. Okay? So what you and I are literally doing is we're working backwards. That's what we're doing. Okay? And we're doing it purposefully, and we're doing it canonically, not chronologically. Okay? Because we could see the manifestations of the principles coming to life, but why? Okay? And so that's what I want to look at with you, okay? As we review. Now, when Paul wrote 2 Corinthians, it was written to specifically defend his apostleship. That's what he's doing, okay? And to answer some of the there were major threats, okay, to his leadership in the church at Corinth. Now, if you've never faced that issue, it could scar you. It could scar you heavily, okay? And the older you are in the ministry and the longer you've been on the ministry and you haven't faced it yet, it is a shock when it happens. It's a shock because, let's face it, there's no way of not personalizing. Okay? Somebody comes up to you, and somebody walks up to Pastor Dan and says, "You are absolutely useless, you're worthless, blah, 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 blah." Don't tell me that doesn't affect you. It does. It does, okay? Especially when you've had a long time ministering with no problems, and all of a sudden something comes up, okay? And I don't wish it at any time in your ministry where you're attacked And you have to be careful not to be scarred. And I will tell you, that's not easy. It's difficult. Okay? And those of you know who a video, for him, it started early. Okay, it started early. Um, and so that's not a fun experience. Okay, and and so what you have to understand is that what he does is Paul does something that nobody else does in the New Testament. He opened his heart. He opens his heart. Okay, and where he reveals all the personal matters, right, about leadership. And that's what's unique about Second Corinthians. Right? So in many ways, this particular epistle of Second Corinthians, it really could stand alone. It could really stand alone by itself. Okay, and I want you to understand it, which is the reason why I taught through this thing, okay, in the church as well. And so now, when various things over the year have come up, I had to remind them of Second Corinthians, and they could see that. Go, oh yes, we see that, we see that, we see that, and it's helped to avert the vicious attacks on the leadership. Okay? Not because the leadership was innocent of something, but the vicious attacks. Okay, what it does, it takes away from whatever the original accusation is to the destruction, not only of a specific leader, but it destroys the church. And that's what you need. And so I always encourage pastors around the world to really focus in on Second Corinthians personally. Okay. Now, I've lived long enough, traveled long enough. The majority of what I have to do around the world with pastors is exactly this problem: a leadership crisis. Okay. Don't know why it happened that way, but it's happened. And it's because it tells me in human nature, we're always going to have conflict. I don't know how you avoid conflict. I'm not that smart. I just know that just by me, the human nature, we're going to have conflict. We just are. My wife helps to lead, the women's ministries and so forth. Okay, and she's had to face conflict after conflict. When this person and that person, it's going to happen.
Don't do anything. Don't do anything, and you'll avoid conflict.
Exactly. Just roll over and die, be buried. Okay. It's just, there's no way of avoiding it. But the question is, how do we encounter it? I don't think anybody here wakes up in the morning hoping somebody knocks on the door to bring conflict. Nobody does that. But, and most times you're shocked when it comes. You go, what are you talking about? It's going to happen. It happens. And so the goal here, okay, as we move forward, is going to be to try to narrow down some of the salient points, some of the highlights, so that we can focus and remain focused on the issue of leadership. Okay, and so that's what we're going to try. We're going to try to glean some of the major principles, right? Okay, and that it teaches leaders, and that's why I said that this book is a standalone. Okay, in that respect, I forgot when I did it. When I did it, this is it's one of 5 books. Okay, this big, going through the details of it that I had to teach through. Okay, it's not this one in particular. This happens to be what I'm doing with the master's students next week. They're in for trouble. But the point is that is that this really is the book that I tell pastors all over the world, and I tell leaders at all levels. Because if you're a leader, you'll have conflict somewhere along the line. Is study this book, because you'll glean the principles, the main principles. Okay. Now, obviously, look, if we look at the screen, we look at everybody here. You're individual. You have individual personalities, different churches, different skill set, different calling, different gifts and talents and experiences, and blah 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 blah. But what's common with all of us is that we are going to face conflict. Now, the details of our conflict may be different, but it's the principles that we all have to apply, the same principle to solve and work out those details, right? So that's what I want you to really begin to understand. And in this process, Paul uniquely bears his soul. And that's kind of a shock. We don't see that in Peter. We don't see that in James. We don't even see that in John. We don't see that in Philip. I mean, the most tender-hearted people. And Paul is the one who, he just stands naked before us in his soul. And very few of us actually reveal our inner souls to the congregation. And by the way, let me caution this. Do not reveal your souls to the congregation. Somebody will squeeze your heart and step on it. I would encourage you, find other leaders whom you can trust to speak to. For those of you who are married, I counsel them and I tell them, if you have, and you're gonna have marital issues, you're gonna have conflict because there's a competition between the ministry, the church, okay, and my marriage and children.
In what sense? In what sense you shouldn't reveal the soul? What do you mean?
I don't think that you should reveal your marital issues, your marital challenges, okay? Find somebody whom you can trust, somebody outside of the parameter of your particular ministry or your particular church, whom you can actually trust, okay? Who will love you as a brother, okay, as a colleague, but who is not going to be, and you have to find the same thing for your spouse, okay? Because once people begin to talk about your problems to somebody else, and there's no stopping it, right? It's like the, somebody talks about a little worm, and we did this in the church. I did an exercise where I told people, I said, I want to start in the corner right here, and I want you to share this little story. And then chain, I said, I want you to keep sharing all the way down. And it went all the way to the back, and it came all the way to the front and the other side. By the time it came to the other side, it was a different story completely. It really was. And you go, how did that little worm become a dragon? How did that happen, okay? Well, you see, that's what people will do with your life, okay? And if your wife shares with a friend, okay? And in the church, watch out. It'll come on the other side. You have no idea what this is going to look like, okay? So what we try to do is find somebody outside of the parameters of your personal ministry whom you can trust. Because let me tell you something, you and I are not experts. You and I are human beings just like anybody else, and we have to face trying to find that balance between our ministry, the church, and a lot of times we become married to the ministry, we become married to the church. Now, God didn't call you to marry the church. God didn't call you to marry the ministry. You're married to your wife, and you have a family. But a lot of times what happens is this thing, the ministry begins to overwhelm your home, your marriage. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle because you and I have to work with sheep. And sheep, by definition, 100% of the time, they have need. Right? It's food, water, and security. Food, water, and security. Food, water, and security. It is just constantly, and it presses on you where your wife feels she's in competition. You married the church, you didn't marry me. And so you and your wife have to bear your soul. Sometimes you're so deep in the forest, you can't see the trees. You're just so deep inside of it. So you need to confine and find somebody whom you can trust, okay? And do it outside. Don't let it do it, because let me tell you something, it's disastrous, right? Now, that's separate from conflict. That's separate from somebody attacking your leadership. And so you have to be very careful. Right? And so this is how I wind up with all these individual conferences with pastors and blah, 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 blah. Right? Now, we in order to understand the crisis of leadership that took place in Corinth and how this attack is that we have to understand how Paul brought the gospel to Corinth. Remember I told you in Acts, we have to study all the details of shipping, sailing, right? Like, so what? Who cares? Right? But it's in studying those details out that we see all the principles come out. They come out. Well, here we have the same thing here in understanding how did he bring the gospel to Corinth. And so those issues become going. And you remember back in what was it, Acts chapter 18? In Acts chapter 18, okay? And it describes how Paul first came to Corinth. I believe it's chapter 18 of the book of Acts, okay? And after he went to, what was it, Athens? He went to Athens, right? Okay. And he had just finished giving a defense. That's pretty funny, right? He got there and he had to defend, right? He had to defend a teacher. I mean, day one. Welcome to Athens, right? It's like we moved to the United States and we came to Peru and the quarantine hits, welcome to Peru. Okay. It's like all of a sudden, I just got off the plane and already we got a crisis here, okay? Well, he gets to Athens, okay? And he brings he brings his teaching, and the first thing he's got to fight with is philosophers, which is the reason why next week's course with the masters is, okay, they're going to be looking at me like this. What are you talking about? Because I have to deal with the essence of philosophy, okay, and culturalism, how it has invaded theology. And I'm always amazed when I talk to pastors and women, you have no idea the background of why you believe what you believe. You know what you believe in, but you don't know what the background is. Okay, and that's what I have to deal with here. Okay, well, this is what happens with Paul. Paul comes to a situation, right, and he immediately has to. We think that philosophy and psychology is something new in the postmodern. No, it's not. The birth pangs of this, it goes way back to Acts chapter 18. Okay. And remember, he's in Areopagus. Okay, remember that he's there. Okay, and he's in the court of the Athenian intelligentsia, right? This is all the brainiacs, all the smart people, right? And and these are the people who are so intelligent, so academic. Which is why I always tell pastors, we have to come down from our academic towers, from the seminary, and we have to come to the foot of the cross of Jesus Christ. And in between those two sections is where you and I minister in the life of the church. And be careful not to stay up in this academic tower, because you become all wise unto yourself, okay? And in becoming wise to yourself, one of the dangers of leadership is that we begin to look down at people with our long academic noses, because I read this and I read that and I studied this and I studied that. I read all, okay? For me going through 6 to 10 books a month, good size. I read like a madman, okay? But I read a lot, okay? But I have to be careful to remain on the ground and deal with people where they are. And the temptation is to raise them to my academic tower, and they have no clue what I'm talking about, okay? Unfortunately, next week's classes, I have to get to that tower to force them, to provoke them to look at things at a broader level. But now, so they're master students, so they're supposed to be able to get there, okay? And I'll challenge them, okay? Now, between me and Marcel, will actually drive them absolutely crazy. Now, they get to the Athenian intelligentsia. They're in this court area, right? And it's located near the Parthenon, okay? And so I want to take you to Acts chapter 17. Turn your pages to Acts chapter 17, because this is what's going to drive us into 2 Corinthians, okay? And so I want you to see, and turn your Bibles to Acts chapter 17. And we're going to be looking at, I think I'm right, I said Acts 17. And let's look at verses, starting in verse 22. Let's look at starting in verse 22, okay? Um, when Paul traveled here, okay, it's like a 45-mile long journey along the coast, okay, from Athens to Corinth, okay? And so he gets there, and let's pick it up here in verse 22. Let's go down to verse 34 at the end of that chapter, okay? And as I said to you, this is the introduction for November, so that you begin to see why we're going to do it this way. Starting in verse 22, let's look at it. He says, so Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus, and he said, men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. Now, let's be honest. Romania is very, very, very religious. Okay? Peru is very, very religious. In Romania is the Eastern Orthodox Church. In Peru is the Catholic Church. Okay? And here, if you become a Christian, they burn your house down and they chase you out of the village. It's very vicious here, okay? And it's very difficult to get a job, okay? And so, and here it's philosophy, and going to the university is a big, 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 big thing, okay? So they're very philosophical, very intelligent, and they work on their vocabulary and their pronunciation, and they want to just, and their posturing, and how you move. They even practice their hand gestures, and they really want to impress you, okay? But if you don't get at that level of the philosophers, okay? And this is the situation that Paul finds himself in, okay? So look at it, verse 23. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. I mean, he wasn't making friends immediately, okay? Right? That's why Paul's my hero, okay? The God who made the world and all things in it, since he is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in the temples with the hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined the appointed times and boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, in verse 27, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each and every one of us. Verse 28, for in him we live and we move and exist, and even some of your own poets have said, for we also are his children. So he attacks their intelligence immediately. Being then the children of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and the thought of man. So he attacks all of their religiosity, their idols, their statues. I mean, he's not making friends, okay? Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to you, he says to men, that all people everywhere should repent. Now, remember, these people are coming from a works rights religion and philosophy, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man whom he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. This is a lot of fun when you have to deal with a lot of atheistic, agnostic philosophers, right? Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some began to sneer, but others said, we shall hear you again concerning. He piqued their curiosity. So Paul went out of the midst. But some men joined him and believed, among whom also was Dionysius and the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, okay, Damaris, and others with him. So obviously, you know, it's like remember Lydia, right? The woman who sold purple, and you know, Paul is speaking, and God opened her heart, right? And so you see this here, right now. And so he's going now to deal with this situation. That's why understanding the leadership crisis and the attack that we see in 2 Corinthians, okay, it starts out here where he begins to bring the gospel to them. Right? Not too long ago, I was in a debate with a priest. You know, here I was making friends again, and we were dealing with the subject of the perpetual virginity of Mary, the perpetual virginity of Mary, right? And so I said, nonsense, 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 right? And so he wanted to debate. And I said, here's the rules of the debate. The rules of the debate was that he would use a Bible and I would use the Bible. That was the rules, right? So when I evangelize in Latin America, where I am, okay, I typically, I evangelize with a Catholic Bible. I don't use my Protestant Bible. I use a Catholic Bible, okay? Now I read this thing from cover to cover because what I discovered was that most Roman Catholics have never read their Bible. They're as ignorant of the word that they will kill you and defend you, but they've never really read it. Just like when I am in the Muslim countries and I travel a lot to Muslim, and so I don't need my Bible to witness. Okay, so what I do in the Muslim countries, okay, is that I evangelize with the Quran. Okay, and what I discover is that what I discovered in the Muslim countries is an appalling percentage of Muslims who have never ever studied their Quran. They just follow what their imam or their version of a pastor is, okay, what he says. So what I've discovered is that Muslims, just like Roman Catholics, okay, and just like a lot of Christians, they never read their word. Right? And so those who are intellectually involved in philosophy, typically they follow a single philosopher who's pretending to be a theologian or has perverted his philosophy by bringing in theology and his theology by bringing in philosophy. Okay? And what's happened is that they don't see the whole scale, the whole depth and breadth of even the philosophical approach. Now, the scriptures clearly has a lot of philosophy in it, okay, if you've ever studied it carefully. Right? And Paul was the expert on this subject. So Paul calls them out. So you could tell on day one, he's not making any friends. And he tells them, you are worshiping the God you don't know because you're ignorant. Now, he didn't say they were stupid. And you do realize, of course, that there's a difference between being ignorant and stupid, right? Okay. Most of our people are ignorant about something. I'm ignorant. So if you tell me I'm an ignorant man, I don't have a problem with you saying that to me at all, okay? Listen, I fly in a lot of planes, okay? I've jumped out of a lot of planes, okay? But I don't know how to fly a plane. I fly in a plane, I don't know how to fly a plane, okay? So if you ask me, how do you fly a plane? I have no clue. I know how to jump out of one, okay? I know how to get in the plane, sit down, and hopefully that we're gonna land, right? But I don't know how to fly a plane. So if you say, well, Brother Eddie, you're ignorant. Yeah, I am. If you told me, Brother Eddie, you are absolutely ignorant of the Romanian culture. I am. Brother Eddie, you're absolutely ignorant of Romanian language. I am. You're absolutely ignorant of our dietary laws. You're ignorant of our food, okay? And why we do it this way, why we do it. I am. It doesn't mean I'm a stupid man. I'm completely ignorant of a lot. So all of us have to wrestle with those areas of our ignorance. Paul confronts the philosophers, okay? And by and large, they were stuck on two main guys in their philosophy. But even then, there were other philosophers that were available to them. Okay? So you have to understand, you know how Brother Gary always talks about those, what's his phrase that he uses all the time? We see things through our, what's the phrase he uses?
Theological grid.
Theological grid. You know, so we all have this set of glasses, this grid that we filter everything through that, right? That's just the natural process. You know, you see the world through your Romanian eyes. I see the world through an American eye, okay? That's just, it's not that one is more superior than the other. It's just that that's how you see it through your family tradition. You see it through your parents, okay? You see it through your culture, okay? That's just a natural process. So when you and I are having to face these people who tend to be highly academic, intellectual, and philosophical, okay? Not always together, but most people who are very intelligent tend to be very philosophical. And philosophy really is the study of linguistics, the study of language. how you say what you say, when you say it, and how you want to twist it. And so we bring in things like existentialism, we bring things like deconstruction, and we bring these philosophical thoughts which have been brought into the church. And when you don't line up with the way they think you should say things and do things, this is when the attacks begin. And this is what we see that's taking place here in the life of the Apostle Paul. Okay, so Paul travels. Okay, and you know he travels to this place and he gets there and he finally arrives there and you know, for the most part in the ancient times, Corinth was a little busy trading center. That's what it was. Okay, it had these extreme contradictions. It had all these, you know, if you remember your history, Corinth was destroyed completely. It was rebuilt completely. It was destroyed completely, and it was rebuilt completely. Okay, and so Corinth by this time is built 100 years later after its destruction. It remained desolate. Okay, and in order for the Roman Empire to justify all the money that was going to be poured into Corinth, okay, because the Roman Empire rebuilt it, and it needed a place to unload, if I can use that phrase, or get rid of, okay, a lot of soldiers, a lot of retiring generals, a lot of military people who were promised, okay, a lot of money and a lot of land if they survived all the battles, okay, and Roman Empire decided, okay, we're going to rebuild Corinth. So it's a brand new spanking city. It's a brand new city. It's not an old city. Like here in Cusco, okay, it's 2,000 plus or 3,000 years old. I live in a very old city, okay? And it's the Incan culture and the sacrifices and blah, 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 okay? Mixed in with mysticism, spiritualism, pantheism with Roman Catholic Church. And so it's a really old city. But if you went to Lima, the capital, okay, and you go to the new section, it's brand new, modern, state-of-the-art, blah, 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 okay? And so for that day, it's a modern city coming in. But it came with a lot of military people, okay? And then all of the retiring soldiers, they were promised 2 bags of silver or 2 bags of gold, each one. Now, I don't know about you, but you know, and by the way, it was twice your weight. So just imagine, Cyprian, that let's say you weigh 50 kilos, okay? You were promised 2 times your weight. That's 100 kilos of silver, 100 kilos of gold, okay? And that's 2 bags.
That was your retirement.
Yeah, just imagine it. Plus, you were promised some kind of land. The Roman Empire had a lot of land.
A house or an apartment in Corinth.
Yeah. And so what happens, they rebuilt. So now you have, and not only that, but now Rome also had to get rid of, it was overrun with prostitutes, okay? I mean, it was prostitutes from all over the Roman Empire that came to Rome because that's where they became rich. You know, prostitutes were not poor, they were rich. I mean, these ladies had money, okay? But they also were commercial savvy. They began to get involved in businesses, okay? Now, Rome wants to clean out, okay, and try to get rid of 50% of all the prostitutes as well, right? What a combination. So you got all these retiring generals, all these retiring military officers, and all of these soldiers, okay? And so where did they ship them to? Corinth. You got all these prostitutes, and they get rid of half of the prostitutes. Where did they ship them to? Corinth. Now they got all of the slaves that were promised at the end of their 20-year cycle, okay? That, and by the way, it's a very different concept from African slavery or Chinese slavery, okay? Or Indian slavery, which are the 3 main ones that we know of historically. That's very different from the clans slavery that existed in Europe, okay? Primarily out of Wales and Scotland and Ireland and English, okay? And then it spread across into all the way to Eastern Europe, okay? Where those slaves were, I mean, they were dead. They were dead. They were abused. They were killed. I mean, it was over with, okay? And then African slavery, the same thing happened to them. There's a lot of similarity between European slavery and African slavery, okay? But when you get to the Mediterranean slavery, okay, in the Roman Empire, that was different. The slave, if he lived or she lived, okay, they were promised so much gold as well or silver. Okay, and remember, the slaves were paid. It would be more like, you know how you go to a store. I mean, you go to a restaurant and you have a servant, right? They serve your table, and they have a wage, okay, some kind of wage. Now, in America, it's a little different. In America, in the United States, you tip your waiters, you tip your servants, and you're not cheap. It's 10%, 15%, 20% of the bill. Okay, so that's why people fight to become waiters at restaurants, because you got a weekly wage plus you have tips, and a good waiter can make somewhere easy $2,000 to $3,000 a month. Okay, so you may think of it as the lowest kind of a position, but it's you make good money if you work in a good hotel, and you are the doorman, okay, or you're the concierge. Okay, a good doorman will make easy $3,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Okay, so I want you to think of it in those terms. That's these slaves are leaving the Roman Empire and they're being sent where? To Corinth. So everybody's going with money. This is not a poor town. It's not Macedonia. But with it comes education. And these are the schools of philosophy of birth where? In the southern peninsula of what we call Greece or Corinth, right? Okay? And so these people are coming with a lot of money, okay? I mean, 2 times your weight. So if you weigh 35 kilos and you get 70 kilos of gold or 70 kilos, I mean, you are lifetime rich. Okay? And so everybody's coming with money, but they're coming now with the opportunities of education, and it's primarily philosophical. And that's the thing that people get lost in. Okay? It's like down here in Peru, the most educated people are here, and that's a lot of them. Okay, here we have two classes of people. We have a low class and a high class. There's no middle class. It's the two extremes. Okay, and it's mostly those upper is all Roman Catholic. Okay, and so here they delve into the whole philosophical notions of life. Okay, and if you go to the Roman Catholic cathedrals here, and they're massive. There are these paintings that are minimum 10 meters high, 50 meters long. And what you show is the conquistadores, okay, from the Spanish, okay, and you show the priests and the bishops and the cardinals, and they all have these lances, these long spears, and you know who they're killing? It's John Calvin, Martin Luther, it's the reformers. So to become a Christian here, okay, it's like you're at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom. Okay? Remember, when Corinth gets birthed, as we take our last break here, is that the Roman Empire was also looking to get rid of all the Christians. If you were a Christian, you were at the bottom of the totem pole. This is the background to the leadership crisis that Paul is about to confront. Okay? And you need to understand that concept. You need to understand those ideas. Okay? Let's take our last break. Let's get started and let's go back into, I'm giving you some background, and the background is crucial to understanding why things happen in the life and in the leadership of Paul. And remember that Corinth at Paul's time, okay, was completely 100% Roman culture. That's really crucial to understand, okay? In fact, Corinth had become a resort town. It was a resort town, okay? It was crowded. It was always crowded always busy, and it had a lot of people from the Roman Empire coming in all the time. Okay, and so they had travelers all the time, full time. And it developed a reputation for debauchery. In the United States, we talk about Las Vegas. That's the most simple place to be in the United States is Las Vegas. Okay, well, Corinth was the Las Vegas of its day. Okay? And with it came is that, and the chief, and then what they did was that they elevated sin to a sacrament. It's literally what they did. They elevated sin to a sacrament. The chief attraction in Corinth, okay, were all the pagan temples, and the pagan temples were served by the prostitutes. Okay? And there were pagan temples that had more than 1,000 prostitutes serving in those temples. Okay? And the pagan religions, which was philosophically based. This is the part that people don't then make the connection. Right? And the pagan religions, okay, what they did was that you had two pagan religions. One was from the Romans and the other was from the Greeks. And the two came together. Okay, in Rome, in Corinth. Okay, so you need to see that. Okay, and what they did was that they made fornication a sacrament. They made fornication a sacrament because the philosophical base of religion was that, it's like, if you ever study existentialism or deconstruction, and do you guys remember back, are you old enough to remember President Clinton? Yeah. Do you remember when President Clinton had sin in the White House? And he talked about sex, and this is the question: what is that little word is? What is it? Is it sin or is it not sin? What is it? What is what is it? And that was his defense. Okay, and people were in a state of shock, and they said, "Well, brother, did you were you involved with this woman? Yes or no?" And he said, "Depends on what is." And most Americans, I mean, not only were they in shock, but they were dumbfounded because they didn't understand what he was saying. You could clearly see the level of education in the U.S. had fallen so low that, that's what's scary about American elections, is that we have so many idiots who go to the polls to vote.
Yeah.
Okay. So many people uninformed, they have no clue. And President Clinton said something, he said, that depends on what is. And people go, is he stupid? No, you're the one. You haven't understood what he just did. He brought in existential deconstruction philosophy because it's been around forever.
Yeah.
That's the reason why in Roman Catholicism, okay, you have all of these unique levels of sin and how they can be forgiven. Because it comes from what is. And so when he said it, by the way, he's a very educated man.
Yeah.
No morals, but he's very educated. Okay. And that's what he did. Well, this people go, where did all this start? Corinth. It's in Corinth, where they elevated fornication to a sacrament. Well, what are you talking about? Well, because the religious services with a philosophical base, okay, have become the focal point for what's called profane worship. This is the reason why they would have these massive orgies in these temples, and it was an act of worship to their pagan gods.
Hollywood elevated homosexuality to the level of, and transgenderism to the level of sacrament. You can say goodbye to an Oscar if you don't include in your movie all these values.
Yep.
You have to bow down before them. You have to accept them and approve them and promote them. Otherwise, you'll never win anything. So.
But this is where we're headed. Okay, and we're making full circle on this. Okay? Well, this is the background. In fact, Corinth was filled with brothels. It was filled with brothels. Okay, but it was elevated, okay, as a religious rite. Well, what does that do to marriage? Right? When I was in Amsterdam years ago, and I got lost. I mean, it was me and another pastor, and so we were asking, well, how do we get to? And they said, well, you got to go down this canal, and then you go hang a right, and you go do this, and you go that. Okay. Well, we had no clue why the people were laughing at us. Okay, and so we follow. You ask directions and you follow the directions, right? And so we're talking, we're having this conversation, and I don't know at what time we just kind of slow down. I'm looking at the path. I was walking on the left, so he's on the right side, and he's walking on the right, and he's looking this way, and I'm looking that way, and we stop and say, "Where are we?" We had no idea where we were, and we turned about and we looked all the way back to the end of the block, and these people are laughing, okay, because the brothels have these big picture windows. They're huge. And in the windows are two naked women, and they're all advertising their craft. We had no clue where we were. Okay? and then we realized we were in the what do they call it? What's it called? The red light district. Okay. And I had no idea where we were. Okay. Well, this was Corinth. This is Corinth. Okay? But what sustained it, and most people never get, there was a philosophy that's behind this. And this is exactly what Paul attacks. And they understood him. They got it. Okay? Just like, when people, Christian pastors will say, well, Jesus really, he got attacked mercilessly and for no reason. And the Jews, no, he didn't. They understood that he claimed to be deity. They understood. We're the ones that don't get it. They got it. They got it. Okay. So when the Athenians, okay, and the Corinthians attacked Paul, they knew why, because he attacked the very heart. The very heart. And the reason I'm taking the slow time to share this with you in this last session as we go into November is because, you see, when you begin to preach truth and you're uncompromising in that truth, prepare to be attacked. Because now what you have is two world views at a complete opposite, but our cultures have adopted the Athenian philosophical values. Where do our people come from? The culture. That's where our people come from. Okay? And so you have to understand the entire city was filled with brothels. Okay. It's just row after row after row. It's visible. It just reminded me when we were in Amsterdam. Okay. Okay. And so they created ritual fornication. It became a ritual. You weren't sanctified if you were not involved with some kind of prostitute somewhere along the line. And because they were elevated to the level of priestess. That's the level they got raised to. Okay. So, I can be a sanctified sinner. I mean, think about that, And so this is where they got the phrase to Corinthianize. To Corinthianize. To Corinthianize meant, I can have sex with anybody I want, and it's part of my act of worship to whatever pagan god that I happen to be serving, okay? And that's what it meant to be to Corinthianize, okay? Okay. For many, many years, okay, there was a law in Las Vegas because the brothels are all they're legal in the state of Nevada, which is where Las Vegas, okay, and they had anti-Corinthianized laws, and they changed them to Corinthianized laws. That's what they did. It's literally what they did. Okay, all right, and so you see this, okay. So to Corinthianize is a synonym for sexual immorality. Okay? That's what it means. Okay, just simply. Okay, okay. And a Corinthian girl. Okay, well that's a Corinthian girl. Well, that's a French girl. That's a Romanian girl. What does that mean? Well, in those terms, that means that she was a legal sex prostitute. That's what it means. Okay? Well, that's a Corinthian girl. So they wouldn't call them a prostitute. So what they just took all, you see, that's why philosophy is based on linguistics, okay? Is that how you change language and how you change the definition of those language, of those words. And that's what they were doing. And Paul comes with the gospel. And he's cutting through all of that. It's like that ship going right through that storm. He's going right through it with it, and he's cutting through all of that nonsense right now. So, to Corinthianize or Corinth, it was synonymous like with Las Vegas, what it is today, okay? Except that, in Las Vegas, the chief attraction is casinos. In Corinth, the chief attraction was the temples, okay, which were basically glorified, sanctified brothels. That's what it is, okay? So Paul finds himself, okay, in this not too auspicious place, right? Is where he finds himself, okay? And he found a church. He found a church in the middle of all of this. A number of years ago, when the Southern Baptist Convention had made the decision that we're going to hold a convention in Las Vegas, Baptists went absolutely crazy. I mean, they protested. They cursed the Southern Baptist Convention leadership. I mean, it was just, and it's an amazing thing to be cursed out in the name of Jesus, right? And so these people are cursing each other in the name of Jesus. And what they never understood was that the reason they did that is because they were going to bring in 30,000 Baptists, what they call messengers, right? Representatives, okay? And they had planned to evangelize. Can you imagine 30,000 Christians in the streets of Las Vegas evangelizing? Can you imagine 30,000 Christians in the middle of Corinth evangelizing at the time that Paul was there? You're about to create a war, and that's exactly what the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, did. And they sent all of these people into the streets, and they sent them into the casinos, and they're passing on tracts and they're witnessing, and that created a storm, a firestorm in Las Vegas, which is exactly why they said we no longer want to approve the building of any new churches. Okay? And so but it's based, and then when the debate took place there as to why this was going to happen this way, they went back to Corinthian, Athenian philosophy. And it was a shock to hear it. You go, wow. But the average Christian and the average person in the United States had no clue what they were doing. They didn't get it. They never connected the dots. Okay? And that's the challenge that we're facing in the church today. Right? Now, so Paul finds this church, right? And basically it's a large community of Jews, basically, right? And the church of that day, it was a synagogue. That's what it was. Okay. And so turn your Bibles to Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5. And in Romans chapter 5, I want you to see this with me because Paul makes this profound statement. Right? We quote it all the time, but we don't make the connection. In Romans chapter 5, look at this in verse 20. He says, the law came in so that the transgression would increase, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. And so when you make a stand on the word of God, this is literally what we're seeing here in Romans chapter 5:20 is what's going to happen. And people are going to be offended. They're going to be offended. And if you jump with me to Acts chapter 18, Acts chapter 18. Now we read Acts 17, remember that? Verse 22 to verse 34. But go to Acts chapter 18. And 18 tells the story of how the church at Corinth was founded. It tells the story, right? When Paul came to Corinth, okay, remember he met Priscilla and Aquila, remember them? Okay, and who happened to be very skilled in the same craft as the Apostle Paul, which was what? He was a tent maker, remember that? Okay? And if you go to Acts 18, turn the page here to, in my Bible, look at verse 2 and 3, verse 2 and 3. And he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to leave Rome. He came to them. So what complicates the issue in Rome is that not only the soldiers coming, the prostitutes coming, the slaves coming, they're all coming with a lot of money, okay? But now we create a problem, just like we have here in Peru. We either have the rich or we have the poor, okay? And so what did Claudius, the emperor of Rome do, okay? He chased out all the Jews and took all their wealth. So now the Jews come poor to court. But it's the group of people that come with the word of God. This sets up the perfect storm. Okay? Look at verse 3. And because he was of the same trade as Paul, right? He stayed with them, and they were working for, by trade, they were tent makers. Yeah. And Paul, to boot, to make things work, he stays in the home of Priscilla and Aquila. How can you stay in the home of Jews? Now remember, Paul's a great philosopher himself. And he's going to go and compete in philosophy with the Athenians. Remember that? He's going to go deal with these people, right? And he goes, and you know, remember when they accused Jesus? He's in the home of a sinner, right? Remember that? He got accused of that. Well, this is what we're having here, okay? And so every week or every Sabbath, okay, he would go with them to the synagogue to preach, right? Now look at verse 4, Acts 18:4. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. Now, by the time we get to this stage in the history of the church, okay, remember Acts chapter 6, the arguing about the native Jews and the Greek Jews. Remember that? Okay? Well, this same thing happens in Corinth. You know, he's not going from better to better. It's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. His very presence created a problem. And then stay with me in Acts chapter 18. Drop down all the way down to verse 18. And we know that they became devoted. In fact, they became very lifelong friends of Paul. This is Priscilla and Aquila, okay? They became fellow Christians. They became co-laborers with him, okay, in his ministry, because in Acts 18:18, it says, Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren and put out to sea for Syria. And with him were Priscilla and Aquila. In Cenchrea, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. Remember that? Remember he had the Benjamite, the vow. Okay? Well, so now this is not going to make his situation any better. Jump with me to Romans chapter 16, verse 3. Romans chapter 16, verse 3. Look at this. Just hang in there. 20 more minutes. I promise to let you go. But look at this in Romans 16:3. He says, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. He never disavowed his relationship with these people. But it's exactly these relationships, okay, that exasperated the problem that he had in Corinth. He's bringing the gospel, okay? He's with these low-life people, right? That's how they were considered. This is the very low of the low of the low of the low, okay? As the syntax of the version of the Bible, it's kind of funny, now that I'm talking to you guys right now from Romania, but in the syntax version of the Bible, they were considered to be the gypsies of their day, okay? Which is what's not a good connotation, okay? Because the majority came originally from India, okay, is where they originally came from, okay? But they came as slaves. Okay, and so, and it's kind of funny, and now I'm talking to the brethren in Romania, okay? Go to 1 Corinthians. Turn your Bibles to 1 Corinthians. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 19, 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 19. Okay? Again, he never disassociates and disavows his relationship with Priscilla and Aquila. Okay. I don't think Brother Gary and I helped Ovidio's situation. He was associated with us. Not my fault that Ovidio is crazy. No, but the point is that and so Paul's not making friends here with his associates here. In 1 Corinthians 16:19, it says, and the churches of Asia greet you, Aquila and Priscilla greet you heartily in the Lord with the church that is in their house. To boot, how dare you be in their house? Okay? Oh, in my brother's case, why would he invite us to his house? Okay? It just didn't get better. Okay, turn your Bibles to 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4. And look at verse 19. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19. Right?
You came to my house because you didn't like the bed at the Grace Church.
No, we hated it. We detested it, okay? But then we found out Adina could cook. We said, oh, we're done. We're sold there. Queen of Susani can cook. That's it. This is it. Okay. Never mind the Feast Hotel. This is it. Okay?
You follow your interest. You follow your interest 100%.
Oh no, we followed our belly. Okay, 100%. 100%. I mean, at that time, Sammy had he was a bad influence, and so we went there. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19, okay? It says, and again, he says, greet Priscilla and Aquila, the households of Onesiphorus. So his identification with people, okay, begins to set up what we call a lot of circumstantial evidence. This is a bad guy to be around, okay? You remember Silas and Timothy? Remember them, okay? Well, this doesn't get better. Silas and Timothy joined them, okay, in Paul's missionary work in Corinth. Now these outsiders, these agitators come in, okay? Turn your Bibles to go back to Acts 18, verse 5. Go back to Acts 18, verse 5. Okay? You can almost trace the conflict you're going to have in the church because I'm showing you a pattern of many things. So by the time an attack comes, you're guilty by association. You're guilty by association. In Acts chapter 18, verse 5, look what it says. It says, but when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, which was considered to be the ghetto, those people, they're the poor people, right? He said, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. And what you're not getting is that all the subtleties of building. Drop down to verse 6, Acts chapter 18, verse 6. Right? And there's a turning point here. A turning point in Corinth came when most of the Jews, okay, in the synagogue refused Paul's teaching because they had to deal with the community of all the pagans. Now, by and large, what happened in Corinth? The majority of the Jews worked in businesses. That's their area of blessing, right? God promised them that he would bless them over and over and over again. But where did they do the majority of the work? Who were they selling to? Who were they serving? It was the Greeks. And now you have the pressure on them, okay? That if we now sell out to this new cannibalistic religion called Christianity, because you remember remember the accusation? They're cannibals. They eat meat. They eat human meat, right? They didn't understand the Lord's Supper. They didn't get it at all. And these people, you know what? We believe in prostitutes. The idea was, I love women. I don't love men. I love women. And so the idea was that all of your sexual deviation behavior was with a woman. But the idea that you're going to be with a man, even though homosexualism was widely widely practiced, okay? But in Corinth, just like later on, we discover, okay, throughout the Roman Empire, and these are sexually deviant people because the men kiss each other with a holy kiss. and they say they love each other. I mean, the ridiculousness of all this is just building. It's building. It's building. It's built. And now the Jews begin to outright now. They're the only people who know the scrolls, right? They're the only ones who know the word. Look at verse 6. But when they resisted and blasphemed, isn't that amazing? You know, I'm going to curse you out, my brother, and I'm going to do so in the name of Jesus. What is that? Doesn't make any sense. But look at them. But when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook out his garments and he said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Uh-oh. What are you doing? I mean, that's over like where Paula goes, you know, where she lives all the way on the other side of the Romania. Okay, no, we're going to evangelize the gypsy. And they go, what? You're going to do what? I mean, you talk to them? You go into their house? You preach to them? Yeah. You know, you don't make a lot of friends in Christianity. Okay? You just don't. And so then Paul decides, remember Jesus went to see, he went to the house, they had to have a meal with sinners. Remember that? Okay. Well, Paul goes into a house, okay, of a Gentile. Again, he's not making friends, right? You remember that Gentile that he goes to visit is Justus. Remember that? Okay? And he happened to, and worse yet, he did it in their face. You know, one thing is that you're kind of subtle about something, but when you do something in the face of religious people, that really irritates them. You know, Justus, his house was next to the synagogue. Can you imagine? He comes out of the church service, he hangs left and goes into Justus' house, and people go, what is he doing? How dare he? And look, this is what he does, okay? And Paul kept preaching the gospel that the Jews had already made a determination they were going to reject. And they even blasphemed about it, okay? And now his entire focus, okay, is now he goes to the marketplace, which no self-respecting Jew was going to go to. And now he goes to the marketplace, which is controlled primarily by the Gentiles. Okay? Look at verse 8. Acts chapter 18, verse 8. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household, and many of the Gentile Corinthians, when they heard, they were believing and being baptized. These are all the wrong people to bring to the church. It's all the wrong people. They don't have the status that we have. They don't walk like we do. They don't dress like we do. It's the wrong kind of people to bring into the church. That's one of the biggest conflicts in the United States, okay? In this whole so-called race war between blacks and whites and blah, 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 blah. And I go, you people are just idiots. You're just blithering idiots. I said, you think you're fighting something that's new? This is not new. This is just not new. When I was in Bucharest, a pastor was telling me, he goes, I got rebuked by my people because I was witnessing to the gypsies and they're coming into the church. And he said, you can't do that. And he said, well, I thought we were supposed to go to all the world, according to Matthew chapter 28. And I said, yeah, all the world, but not here, not there, not here, not here, not there. Okay? And so you have to understand, this isn't anything new. There's no such thing as a race war. This is ethnocentric cultural battles that are going on, okay? And they're very real. They exist. They exist. But this isn't anything new, okay? So why is it that the majority of people in the Corinthian church, okay, they were Gentiles and worse. See, it doesn't get better. Not only were they Gentiles, but they came from pagan backgrounds. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2, please. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. Look at this with me. And it says this, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. You know that when you were pagans, you were led astray to the mute idols. However, you were led. Yeah, it's not like, nobody pulled you by your nose. We just have a natural proclivity for sin, don't we? Nobody led me to sin. I was born with a sinful nature. When you take a baby that is born and you train them, okay, and they be a little child, okay, here's what you discover. You never have to train a baby to say no. In fact, they can't even pronounce the words and they go like this. They understand rejection. They understand no. They understand how not to, they're experts in disobeying from the womb. You have to train them to say, yes, obey. That's what you have to do. You never have to train a baby to say no. You have to train them to say yes. And what you're having is that these people were led. They were clearly led, but they were willing followers. Go back to Acts chapter 18. Unless we can bring this part into a close right here. And Acts chapter 18. Okay. Look at verse 9 and 10. Acts chapter 18, verse 9 and 10. And what I'm giving you is the background that leads to this leadership crisis. And in verse 8, chapter 18, verse 9 and 10, okay? Now you have to understand that Corinth, ironically enough, turned out to be one of the most fruitful mission fields. Fruitful mission fields, okay? That Paul had ever visited, right? So as the church there was beginning to grow, this is what happens in verse 9 and 10, Acts chapter 18. And the Lord said to Paul in the night, by a night vision, he says, do not be afraid any longer, but I go on speaking to them, and do not be silent. For I am with you, and no man will attack you in order to harm you, for I have many people in this city. Paul's evangelistic ministry continued for more than a year here. Okay, it's about a year and a half, something like that. He was there before he met any serious resistance. This is what leads to the attack. We made the decision finally to come to Cusco, Peru, is because we found a place that was absolutely resistant to the gospel, 100% exclusively Roman Catholic, and I said, I love the challenge. I just love the challenge. I love it when people tell me no, because I'm going to do the opposite, okay? And the thing about it was that we're discovering, okay, there's a fruitful mission field here. And we're coming across people who have told us, I'm a Roman Catholic, but I reject the Pope, I reject the saints, I reject Mary, I reject this, I reject the flowers, I reject the candles, I reject this, I reject 100 Hail Marys, 100 Our Fathers, and I reject the priest. He goes, there's sexual deviance and perverts. I mean, and they're telling me, and I go, well, now that you rejected all that, what do you accept? I don't know. And here's what we discovered here, just like Paul discovered. When I talk about the gospel, here's the question that I get asked. And I just stopped being amazed by it. They go, what's the gospel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've never heard the gospel. Now that we lead our house churches here, okay, the very first person that came to Christ is how we started. The taxi driver at the airport picked me up. And he said, oh, where are you from? And I said, from the United States. Ah, you're visiting? I said, yes, I am. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm preaching the gospel. He said, what's that? I said, you go to church? He goes, well, I'm a Roman Catholic. He goes, yeah, I go to church. I said, you don't know what the gospel is? He goes, no, never heard of it. I said, well, you were born and raised in Roman Catholic? He goes, yes. I said, have you ever read the Bible? He goes, nope. He says, the priest always has these little cute little notes, they call it missalettes. He preaches that, but we never have to open the Bible. I said, you mean you never heard the gospel? So he asked me, what is the gospel? I said, no, somebody asked you the question, what is the gospel? I'm obligated to answer, right? I just, you can't be rude. You got to answer the question, right? And so I began to share the gospel. Now, from the airport to the hotel is not really that far. So he gets in front of the hotel and he says, can you finish telling me? And so I finished telling him. He said, what do I do to be saved? And he got saved. Well, I went into the hotel, and what happens is that very next morning, early in the morning, it's like 6:30 in the morning. I've been up since 5. Okay, that's one of my biggest problems. I don't sleep long anymore. And so I went down to breakfast, and the manager of the hotel said, "There's a man here to see you, but we wouldn't let him in." I said, "I don't know anybody. I'm here for the first time." Now the only guy I know is the guy that I met in the taxi, right? And that night, I was evangelizing the waiters, right, in the restaurant. And so I said, I'll go to the lobby, see who it is. It was the taxi driver. And he said, he says, how busy are you these days? I said, well, I'm open. He said, can you come to my house tonight? I said, now, why would I do that? He says, I will pick you up. I said, well, why would I do that? And he said, I don't know you. And he says, no, I told my family what happened, and they're shocked.
Wow.
He says, can you come and share, tell them what you told me? So I did. So I went to his house. That night, he picked me up, brought me back to the hotel, and I shared the gospel. Well, the next morning, okay, again, the front desk of the hotel said, there's somebody here to see you. Is he back? So I went to the lobby, right? And, I'm down at breakfast having coffee, right? And at 6 o'clock, and there's another man there. I go, do we know each other? He goes, yes. I said, I don't think so. He says, I was one of the group of people that were in the house last night. I said, really? He goes,
Wow.
I want to know more. And he says, can you come to my house? He says, we never heard the gospel. So I go to his house and we share the gospel with his family. They begin to cry and they're weeping and they go, what do we do to get saved? I said, you trust in the Lord Jesus Christ with your heart. How do we do that?
Wow.
They said, well, is there a prayer? And I said, I'm not going to lead you in a prayer. I said, the prayer comes from your heart. And they were like, well, they began to pray and they began to repent. Well, I spent 5 days every night going to somebody else's house. The 5th day, the hotel manager says, what do you do? There are all these people come to see you. So I began to share the gospel with him, okay? Well, Saturday morning, he said, can you come to my house and share this? And I began to preach. Now, the reason I share that, I'm not super spiritual. I am nobody special. Zero. I don't think of myself as anything special. I'm just stupid. I am so stupid. I actually believe, when people call me stupid, I go, I am. I'm here. I'm so stupid. I believe what the Bible says. So I don't lead anybody in the sinner's prayer. I just share the word. Okay. I actually believe the Holy Spirit in the Word of God, because you cannot separate the word from the Spirit and the Spirit from the word. It's an act of impossibility. I'm so stupid that I just, this is what the Word of God says, and the Spirit gets all of that. And so this is how we started, and this is how we get to 40 house churches. It's a fruitful mission field because of one simple little thing. They never heard the gospel. They don't even know what the word means.
Wow.
And I'm going, hey, we came to the right place and didn't even know it.
Yeah.
This is exactly what began now. But with that, we've been attacked, threatened. I haven't even shared any of the details of that, okay? Constantly. People point us out, that's that guy there. That's that guy there, okay? Because I'm the only guy who's walking in the streets, okay, dressed like I am, okay? I'm the only one who's always in the suit, okay? And they look at me and go, that guy right there. It's him, you got to watch him, okay? Well, and so I'm in the restaurants and people go, you're the American Christian, aren't you? I go, yeah. And they said, why do people hate you? I said, I don't know. Well, what do you say to them? I'm obliged to answer his question. And so now I have 11 waiters from different restaurants
Wow.
for the house churches. Okay. And now I got this other guy who said, you know, my boss, the owner of the restaurant, he's invited you to come over for lunch. Lunch? That sounds good to me. And it's at that moment I get the spirit of, at that moment I get the spirit of Sam, right? You know, food, food, food. That's okay. So I go, and the owner says to me, he goes, I like to, and he says, can you sit in the back? And I asked him, I said, sure, I can. I said, are you embarrassing me? You don't want nobody to see me? He goes, no, I want to concentrate on what you got to say because I'm talking to my worker and he's saying some very strange things and I got questions. Okay. He says, I'm going to join you for lunch. So he gets a plate of food. We sit down, we're eating, and we're talking. Well, so he says, now, I don't understand. You mean you don't go to a priest? And I go, nah. I said, that guy's as rotten as anybody else. I said, anyway. He goes, yeah, I know that. That's true. He goes, man, they get drunk and they have women, they have this and that. And I said, and you still go to them? I said, let me see. A corrupt man goes to a corrupt man to sin, to ask forgiveness for his corruption. I said, does that make sense? He goes, never heard it put it that way before. I said, well, yeah, it's the blind leading the blind. He goes, well, I don't want to be that. And so I got sharing with him, right? Well, long story short, right? So he invites me to his house. I go over there, and now it's the quarantine. I can't go out, you know, because I'm a senior citizen. They tell the old people can't go out, blah, 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 blah. I said, I'm going to go share the gospel. So the cop stops me, and he says, you can't be out here. You can't do that. We're going to arrest you. I said, well, go ahead and do that. He said, why would you let me arrest you? I said, well, you got a gun. I don't. You know, I mean, it's like, I don't have much to say. He said, but why are you out here? I said, well, the reason I'm out here is because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He goes, what's that?
Yeah.
So I'm standing with him and his partner sharing on a street corner, right? And he's listening. And I said, well, let me ask you a simple question. I said, this is what I do. I share the gospel. I said, but I want to ask you a simple question. If somebody comes up to you and pulls a gun and you're not fast enough and they pull the trigger first, what happens to you? He goes, I die. I said, okay, so if you die and you wake up in one instant before the presence of God, and let's say that God is standing in the front gate of heaven, okay? I had to put in terms that he can understand. I said, and God turned around and he asked, well, why should I let you into my kingdom? What's your answer? He said, I don't have an answer. I said, then you got problems.
Yeah.
So I started sharing with him, okay? Well, long story short, we're going to come to an end here, right here, okay? Right? They invited me to go to La Comisaria. La Comisaria is the police station.
Yeah.
Okay?
To
So
share the
he brought 50 police together, right? Okay? He allowed me to share the gospel for a lunch hour. Paul had a fruitful mission field because these people had never, ever heard the gospel.
What?
That's how we now have police officers who protect our house churches.
Wow.
They heard the gospel. And we had 22 of them come to Christ. And now we're visiting their families.
Hallelujah.
Right? But how do I do it? I have to enter with a philosophy that they understand.
Yeah.
And in that philosophy, I insert the gospel.
That's so important.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor and a privilege to be with you this week. I trust that God will be merciful to you that you put up with me for a whole week. I have no idea why Brother Gary wanted me to torture you, but you guys must have done something wrong. And so I would give you advice to repent and get things right with God, okay? Because Gary's threatening you to bring me back. So you must be doing something wrong. Absolutely something wrong, okay?
Brother, we have to cope with you for eternity, so we might as well learn to cope with it.
That's the classic definition of a masochist. But listen, it's been an honor and a privilege to be with you this week. I would ask you to please send me the links for all the videos to post, not to view. I know you got that private little crazy thing that you guys, but I need to repost them onto my page. So there should be what, 21, 22, 25 videos, I guess, of some sort, okay? I don't know how you do that, but I'll trust on video to, because I have no idea who everybody was filming, okay? And I wanted to at least introduce this section to you so you get a grasp. It's just not that people attack Paul, but you have to understand the background as to why they were attacking. And you live in a country where the Eastern Orthodox Greek Church is very, very powerful still, okay? Just like the Roman Catholic Church is, okay? You're not going to make friends. Okay? You'll make a lot of enemies, but in that group of enemies will come the converts that people will touch.
That's true.
Any questions or comments? Remember rocks, shoes, wherever you want to throw. Remember video, okay? Remember video. Video is you know, he's the representative here, so he's all open arms. You know, he's gonna be like Stephen. So video, by the way, so video Stephen Petrick, okay? And so you know, remember the video, okay? And but then after that you have to face Adina. So I don't know which one. I don't know which one's first. You know, the Queen of Susani would get back at you, okay? She's scared, okay? So if I was you, make sure you hit him when she's down there, okay? Now, any questions before we close?
No, thank you so much for teaching us and provoking us this week.
Very much.
Huge blessing.
If I
Yeah.
ever make it back to Romania, okay, visit Adina's kitchen. I will fight the children for chair table. we will throw down. We will before you guys get here, I was here, buddy. We will throw down. We will throw down, okay? And Sammy better be in a long distance away.
No. I'm coming on YouTube.
No, that's a mean eating machine. I said, I'll shoot the competition. Okay. God bless every single one of you, and may His grace rest upon you.
You too.
God
my
bless.
brother.
Blessings.
Thank you very much.
Pastor Eddie.
Thank you so much.